In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down how to drink coffee on the carnivore diet whilst minimizing the side effects it has. There are some people who lose a lot of weight on the carnivore diet, but as soon as they reintroduce coffee, it seems to stop. And then there are people like Jordan Peterson, where if they consume even a small amount of any plant, they have chronic anxiety. Now, this is incredibly frustrating. For a lot of people, coffee brings them tremendous amounts of happiness, whether it's the taste or the ritual aspect of it. When they wake up in the morning and have that warm cup of coffee, it makes them tremendously happy. But when it causes you to be super anxious, when it causes the weight loss to stop, or it causes you gut and skin issues, it can be incredibly annoying. You're sort of put in this lose-lose situation where you either have the coffee and feel terrible, or you don't get to have your coffee. And these symptoms can be worsened on the carnivore diet because you don't have the plant material such as fiber, which actually absorbs some of it and helps to mitigate the symptoms of it. So in today's video, we're going to look at just this. We're going to break down how you can drink coffee without the negative effects so you don't ruin your carnivore results. And then at the end, I'll give you some bonus best practices such as which type of bean is the best. Alrighty, let's get into it. Why does coffee cause problems? A lot of people think that coffee is healthy. It has these wonderful antioxidants. And whilst that may be true, because it is a plant, it does have defense compounds. Essentially, every plant has some good. Nutrients, antioxidants, those sorts of things. However, it's the old yin and the yang. There is no light without dark. So whilst we may have these good things, we do have these defense compounds which can cause a lot of problems to people. The fact is with coffee is that it is a bean, and a bean is a seed. And because the seed is essentially the plant's baby, it really needs it to survive. So not only do they have these defense compounds, but they have them in the most concentrated amounts. So essentially, like all plants, coffee is, at least to some degree, a poison. It may be a nice tasting and warm poison, but it is still a poison. Let's have a look at how these defense compounds work. So first we have caffeine, which is quite literally a neurotoxin. Caffeine actually fries the brains of the insects that consume it. Now obviously we're a lot bigger than insects. We have a lot more of, defense capability against these defense compounds. So whilst it doesn't fry our brains, it does still have some effect on us, as well as the fact that it increases our stress hormones monumentally. When you consume a cup of coffee, your cortisol and adrenaline, which essentially are your fight or flight hormones, increase significantly, which is certainly not a good thing, as well as the fact that there are tannins present in coffee. Now, how tannins work is that they bind to proteins, which means they bind to some nutrients and prevent their absorption, but they also bind to our gut lining, as our guts are actually made from proteins, which can, especially with people who have a sensitivity to them, cause massive problems. Remember, our guts are responsible for everything. They produce many of the hormones that make us happy. There's a great saying that goes, if you turn your gut inside out, it's how your skin looks. So our guts essentially affect everything. Now, not only are coffee beans themselves incredibly bitter, which signals to us that, hey, there are defense compounds present in here. It's our body's way of essentially saying, maybe you don't want to consume this. But tannins themselves are also bitter. When we isolate tannins and make them into an extract, that itself is incredibly bitter. Now, what is incredibly interesting about tannins is that species like goats who have consumed tannins for an extended period of time, 1,000,000+ years, have developed adaptations. In goat saliva, there's an enzyme called tannins, which actually breaks down tannins before they get into the digestive tract. But because humans only started consuming tannins roughly 12,000 years ago, when we started agriculture, well, insignificant doses at least, we don't have any adaptations, so tannins can cause some very unpleasant problems in some individuals. Okay, so we know there's definite bad in coffee, but how can we minimize the effect that these things have on us? Also, just for the record, I'm not promoting coffee use. I'm not saying it's good for you. I'm just saying if you're gonna drink it, here's how you can make it slightly better. Okay, first, let's look at how we can minimize gut and cellular damage. Essentially, every single human issue is caused by inflammation to our cells. Whether it be disease or mental health issues, which we'll get into shortly, every single issue that humans have is due to the cellular inflammation. Now, there's no way you can entirely protect yourself from these defense compounds. If there was, then, there'd be no problem with anything. We could eat all the processed food we liked without having to worry about the negative. However, there are definitely some things you can do to minimize the effect they'll have. One of these is to avoid having coffee on an empty stomach. When we eat before we consume coffee, it sort of gives our gut lining this sort of protective barrier. Again, I want to emphasize it doesn't completely protect it, but it will at least mitigate some of the problems that these defense compounds can present. Now remember, even the example we looked at earlier with tannins, they bind to our gut because our gut cells are made from proteins. So by having this extra layer, it prevents some of the tannins from being able to bind to our gut. Now this damage to the gut for a lot of people causes significant anxiety. A lot of people are of the belief that anxiety is only to do with our life circumstances. But what we see happen time and time again on the carnivore diet is that when we remove these plant toxins, anxiety disappears. In fact, in a study of 2,000 people done by Harvard University on the carnivore diet, 96% of people reported improved or resolved psychiatric symptoms. Now, there are a couple of ways this works. The first being that 90% of serotonin is made in our guts. Now, serotonin is the hormone that gives you that sort of just, you're happy with life sensation. You're satisfied, you're content. It's responsible for that sort of emotion. So when our guts are damaged, we're less effective at producing this hormone, and your baseline level of happiness decreases, and you just sort of feel more on edge. Okay, so now we know how coffee causes some people anxiety. How can we minimize it? The first thing you can do is to have decaf coffee. As I talked about earlier with caffeine, it increases our stress hormones. Now, when your adrenaline and cortisol is high, undoubtedly you will feel more anxious. So by switching to a decaf coffee, this can help. And again, do not consume coffee on an empty stomach. That can also help to mitigate anxiety, as not only does it give our guts that protective lining, but it also makes caffeine less potent. But truth be told, there is a subset of the population who cannot consume coffee at all, whether it be decaf or regular caf, without having some sort of anxiety symptoms. So yeah, if you do have anxiety, you are one of the types of people that I would definitely recommend avoiding coffee. Okay, so how can we drink coffee and still maximize our nutrient absorption? Now, obviously this is incredibly important. Nutrients are responsible for carrying out every single function in our body, as well as the fact that, and this is a rather underrated aspect of nutrients, is that they're incredibly important for satiation, or in other words, feeling full. Our bodies will stay hungry till we have every single nutrient. So if we're consuming coffee, which like we talked about, has these anti-nutrient properties which prevent nutrient absorption, it may make us hungrier, and therefore we will lose weight slower. There's a classic example of this in a study that they did with oysters and wheat. Now, wheat, obviously being a plant, it has many defense compounds. I think in this study, they were looking at phytates in particular, which aren't present in coffee, but coffee, like we talked about earlier, does have things like tannins, which are also anti-nutrients. But essentially, what they found in the study is that they would get people to eat oysters at the same time that they would consume wheat. And what happened? Wow, there was significantly less zinc absorption from the oysters when consumed with these plants that have these anti-nutrients. So how can we avoid this happening? Try not to consume coffee around our meal times. Okay, well, what about sleep issues? Well, caffeine has what is known as a quarter life of 10 hours, meaning that after you consume coffee, 10 hours later, a quarter of it's in your system. So if you drink a coffee at midday, come 10 p.m., a quarter of it is still there. Now, even if you're someone who's like, well, I can drink a coffee right before I go to bed and I fall asleep straight away, it also affects you in the sense that you don't get into as deep of a sleep. So even if you think it's not affecting you, you're going to wake up in the morning just feeling less rested. Now, there's very easy workarounds to this. The first one being stop consuming coffee at least 10 hours before you sleep. And the second option is to have decaf. But do be wary with decaf. To strip the caffeine from the coffee bean, they often use toxic solvents. So if you are having a decaf coffee, make sure you have one that explicitly says that this has been decaffeinated naturally. And then even with these decaffeinated versions, they do still have small amounts of caffeine. So if you are someone who's very prone to the effects of caffeine, you may just, I guess just stop drinking coffee very early in the morning. That would be my advice to you. So how can you drink coffee without it affecting your weight loss? Well, I think the biggest concern with this is what you actually have your coffee with. Coffee itself has zero energy. Remember, fat is stored energy. But before I get into whether you should have milk, cream, butter, or whatnot with your coffee, let's look at how black coffee affects people. Now, this is actually very interesting, I find. A lot of people report that when they have black coffee, it suppresses their appetite. Caffeine itself is an appetite suppressant. However, there are some individuals, including myself, that find when we drink black coffee, we actually get hungrier. Now, I haven't seen too many people talk about this, so I was having a good think earlier as to why this could be, and I've come up with a couple of possible reasons. The first being that when you drink coffee, you do still get a small blood sugar spike. Now, when our blood sugar spikes, another hormone known as insulin also spikes to bring our blood sugar back down, and insulin actually blocks leptin. Now, leptin is the hormone that's responsible for saying to our brain, hey, we're full, we don't need to eat. Or maybe it could have something to do with the fact that it increases our stress hormones. But what I think is actually most probable is due to the fact that when we consume coffee, obviously there's some sort of flavor. Now, we see this problem very present with artificial sweeteners, is you drink this thing and it has flavor, so your body expects calories. Hence why we have the blood sugar spike. Actually, I should say energy. Calories are definitely not the best metric. Anyway, so your body expects energy to come. but the energy doesn't come. So your body's kind of confused. Like I said, we see this with artificial sweeteners and how they increase people's appetite. Whatever reason it may be, some people do report that having black coffee does make them hungrier. But I mean, for the vast majority of people, it actually suppresses their appetite. So I don't know. I don't know you. So yeah, I'm not too sure. You tell me, my friend. Does black coffee make you hungrier or less hungry? Actually, comment that down below. I'm very curious to know what the common consensus is on this. Let me know your experience. If black coffee does decrease your appetite, it is definitely the best for fat loss. There's zero energy with it. Again, fat is stored energy. So that is definitely the best case scenario. But let's say you don't like black coffee, or you're one of these people like myself who actually gets hungry when they have coffee. What should you have? Well, my number one recommendation has got to be butter or cream. Now, this may come as a surprise because milk has less energy than butter and cream. But milk has one small problem, and that is that it contains carbohydrates. And so, like I talked about earlier with the blood sugar spikes, it blocks your leptin signaling, and so your brain isn't quite satisfied and it wants to eat. But the thing with butter and cream that you really need to consider is that, well, it is incredibly high in energy, and it's super easy to overconsume because there's essentially zero satiety from eating it. And again, satiety means like it doesn't make you feel full even remotely from consuming it. I personally, if I'm having cream in my coffee, will only have 15 mils. And even that, now again, calories are definitely not the best metric, but they can be a useful tool just to put things in perspective. And only 15 mils of coffee, there is 50 calories. Now, to put this in perspective, the average person would probably put like 100 mils in their coffee, which is 400 calories. Now, 400 calories is 400 grams, or which is close to a pound of lean meat. Now, obviously, you're not eating lean meat, but I'm just giving you a comparison. What would make you more full? 400 calories of a steak, even if it has no fat, or one coffee with a bit of cream in it. So, and the butter's the exact same. Butter and cream are essentially the same thing. So make sure if you are putting butter or cream in your coffee, it's only a small amount if weight loss is your concern. But anyway, yeah, do keep these things in mind. The milk definitely has less energy, but it will make you hungrier. The cream and the butter, high in energy, and then the black coffee, depending on who you are, will either make you less hungry or more hungry. So these are some key considerations as to what you want to put in your coffee if fat loss is your goal. So I've looked at how we can mitigate anxiety, how we can mitigate sleep issues, and how we can mitigate fat loss plateaus while still consuming coffee. But let's look at some good general best practices. The first being, you want a good bean. You want an organic and mold-free bean. They often store coffee beans for a long time before they sell them, which often means they can gather mold, especially if they're in wet, damp environments. And you want an organic bean, as I mean, if it's not organic, you have these toxic pesticides on it also. You also want a good quality of water. You know, tap water has lots of things added to it. Personally, I don't think it's great for health, and we're starting to see these things clearly demonstrated in studies. Try your best to drink it early in the day. Minimize dairy. Raw dairy is definitely better because when they pasteurize dairy, they heat at these high temperatures, cause the proteins to be denatured, and it can be inflammatory. Personally, when I have pasteurized milk, my skin breaks out terribly, even if I'm only consuming fatty red meat. So yeah, pasteurized dairy for some people, well, for all people, it's definitely inflammatory, but some people will notice the effects from the inflammation more than others. Don't consume it around mealtime like we talked about. It can block some of the nutrient absorption. Try not to have it on an empty stomach, and please do remember, there are some people who just cannot consume coffee and live their best quality of life, especially if you're anxious or have autoimmune conditions. Anyway, hope you found this video useful. Subscribe if you want to see more videos like this, and you might enjoy this video here where I debate AI and get it to admit that the carnivore diet is the optimal diet for humans. See you next time.